you see the national birth rate taking a nosedive right now with unbelievers. And yet within the Reformed Christian community and the greater Christian community, it's went up 40%. My church is a church of 700 people. The average age is maybe 27.
Today on Civically Minded, I'm excited to bring on kind of a new friend of the show and host of his own podcast, a larger podcast than mine, more well-established. He started it back during the COVID pandemic, but I'm happy to welcome Greg Moore of the Dead Men Walking podcast. Greg is a resident of Michigan, where he acts as a county commissioner of the county he lives in. He's married to his wife, Samantha. They have 3 children, which they homeschool. He's a small business owner, a real estate broker, and a musician, if I'm not wrong. I think he plays piano and drums. So welcome my multi-talented friend, Greg Moore, to the Civically Minded podcast.
Corey, that was probably the best and smoothest intro of me I've ever heard. That beats my intros that I do for my guests. So awesome. That was I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, man. Love what you guys are doing at Civically Minded.
Thank you. I was also kind of first question, kind of curious. You had a co-host fairly early on into the life of your podcast. And I know in some of the stuff that I've watched recently, and I'm not going to pretend like I get to catch every episode. I haven't seen your co-host on recently, or I've just missed those. Is he still part of what you're doing, or has it kind of become a one-man show?
No, it's pretty much a one-man show. So that was Jason Hamlin. He's a brother in the Lord. We were attending the same church at the time, and he lived like 5 houses down.
Yeah.
So it was like awesome. It was like every Sunday night, come out, walk over, record, you know what I mean? And he was there for almost 2 years, I think. And then he moved away and had some other stuff where his job changed. It was just hard to get us together. So kind of phased out, but love what he did for the first couple years. Yeah, I've been on my own for probably about 2.5 years. We'll be 5 years in April, been doing the podcast. But yeah, the early ones were fun, and I really miss having a co-host. It's so nice just to have someone else there to bounce stuff off of in studio. Most of my interviews are done like yours, probably on StreamYard or Zoom, or it's video, and you just don't get the same interaction when you have someone in studio. We were just talking about Parker Brown, who does the Watchwell podcast, and he's 30 minutes south of me. So it's like he came in studio, him and Nick's from Indiana. His co-host, and it was just so much fun to have 3 guys here and in studio and talking. And I told him just on a text, actually just 20 minutes ago. It's funny that you brought this up. Well, actually I brought up Parker, but talking about this, I said, he goes, hey, we should come over for dinner and hang out more. We're only 30 minutes away. I said, you're going to become a co-host of this podcast if you're not careful. Like, I'll get you in here.
There are worse things. So, well, and one of the cool things that I think is, as content creators, that I'm still learning, because I'll be celebrating my 1-year anniversary on the 10th of November. So
congrats.
Right. Thank you. Right after we get home from the Fight Laugh Feast conference, which we will talk more about later. But
you're now in the 5%, just so you know. 80% of podcasts fail within the first 6 months, 95% fail within the first year. So if you made it to a year, you, my friend, are in the upper echelon of the 5% that have made it through. So let's go.
I feel, and again, you and I share that we're both licensed realtors, and there's some horrific statistics about those of us that have our real estate licenses only last like 2 or 3 years. So we're both I don't know what that says of us.
I'll throw this statistic out for you. Just read this in the National Association of Realtors. We won't get too far into it. This isn't a real estate show, but 47% of licensed realtors nationwide sold 0 homes last year. That'll tell you how many part-timers and how kind of oversaturated the real estate market is, and how tough it is when it's not a crazy seller's market like it was in 21, 22, and 23.
That's right. So, no, you're absolutely right. And we could have a whole show about real estate because we both have a long history there, but
we should one day.
We absolutely should, because I think there's some kingdom building, and I mean that both literally and metaphorically, that could be explored there. So let's definitely do that in the future. But the reason I wanted to have you on today is you have been, and I've kind of admired what you do from afar. We've just recently connected, just so everyone watching kind of knows that this is kind of a new friendship we're sparking off. But I met you for the first time last year at the Ark Encounter at the Fight Laugh Feast conference. I had never been. I came for the first time with my father-in-law, and oddly enough, it fell last year over my youngest child's first birthday and my wife's birthday. So I was like, there's no way I can go. And my wife was like, no, it just go and have a nice time. She's turning 1. She won't even know. And I'm not turning 1, and it's not, so she was like, it's totally okay. And I was like, are you doing one of these women things where you say it's okay? And she's like, no, it's really okay. So she was super cool about it. And the Chocolate Knox actually made this really nice video that she still has on her phone a year later. She's kept it all this time of, you know, thanking her for letting me come over such important dates and stuff. He was so cool about it. It's very Knox like.
Yeah.
And but I met you there, and it was just in passing because I was one of, 2,000 people. And so your a sticker for the Dead Men Walking podcast is on the outside of my laptop since then. So
Love
that's,
it.
yeah, you've been a part of my world for longer than I've been a part of yours. But I've watched from afar, I love what you do on your show. I really do appreciate your content. But one of the things that I've grown to really appreciate probably the most about you is the kind of the excitement and the brotherhood, and this could include women, of course, as well, but the brotherhood that you bring forward into the Christian content creation world. You're really good about kind of cheerleading all of us that do this. And so you've gotten kind of known on X for doing these bracketed tournaments where kind of March Madness style tournaments. And I think, if correct me if I'm wrong, you do them kind of coinciding with that, right?
Yeah, we do them in March.
So kind of tell me where the idea came from, and what how'd that all start? Because I think it's an awesome idea.
Well, like most good ideas, my brain kicks on at about 9 p.m. I'm a night person. My wife is a morning person, so that in and of itself in the marriage is a struggle. She's ready for bed at 8. The kids are usually in bed by 9, and I go, "Ooh, let me go out to the office and create something." And so everyone was in bed. I was out in the office. I was sitting here, and I go, "Man, I really do like." I'm not a big basketball fan, but March Madness is fun just because it's brackets, and I have a little bit of that analytical, literal mind. That's probably why I tend to like theology and definitions and things like that. I said that'd be fun to do a bracket for like reformed podcast because there were so many good ones coming out at the time. This was 3 years ago, and since then, so many more, which I'm happy to see. And the very first bracket 3 years ago only had 16 people in it. It was basically everyone who had been on my podcast. I went, okay, we'll do this as who's the best that's been on my podcast. So did it, and I had a couple more than that, but we wanted to keep it to 16 to keep everything even, right? 16, 32, 64, kind of the
Yep.
bracket style.
Yep.
And James White handily won that against Apologia. They were the finalists, and it's funny because they were kind of, they're both connected out there in Arizona, and they were making videos back and forth, and Jeff Durbin is saying, James might be swaying the vote, and just had fun with it, and it really caught on because of those two, which was cool. And then the next year, I think we expanded it to 64, and even after that, I had people messaging me going, "What about this podcast? Why don't I see this one? This is my favorite one." And just like you said a few minutes ago, I can't pretend like I listen to all these podcasts. I'd get nothing accomplished. We're both busy. So you really try to find podcasts. If I can get one or two a month of some of these guys that I haven't heard of, I'll try to listen, or something that piques my interest. Oh, this person is this guest and they're talking about that. And I realized, oh, this is a lot bigger than just who's been on my podcast. We've got hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of really decent podcasts. And that's the point here is I don't know if I have ever come across a kind of a section of subject that is in reformed theology and doctrine and culture and politics, kind of what I do, that have more better produced podcasts than we do. You could put us up against celebrity news. You could put me up against nature stuff. You can put me up against comedy. I see so many well run, well produced, well written guests on in that segment. I go, man, these got to get exposure, because really the way we fight pagans and the secularists and the leftists is we just overwhelm them. You see the national birth rate taking a nosedive right now with unbelievers. And yet within the Reformed Christian community and the greater Christian community, it's went up 40%. My church is a church of 700 people. The average age is maybe 27, and we've had
Wow.
a new baby born every 11 days for the last 3 years. So that'll tell you what we're doing when it comes to combating the birth rate, right? Because we think children are a blessing. We think men working hard and owning businesses is a blessing from the Lord. So the way that we combat the, like I said, like the secular culture is we just overwhelm them with what God calls us to do anyway. And one of those things is preaching the gospel, exploring God's word, theology, which just means to know God. And when you have that many podcasts coming out, then yeah, then we need to promote them, and we need to find our brothers in the Lord that are just started and go, hey, just so you know, when I started X amount of years ago, I did this and this helped save time, or I called this guy and he helped with that. And we need to do that for each other. This isn't a competition. There's 8 billion people in the world. Every podcast is global. You will find your niche. You will find your followers. And even if it's 50 people, I mean, that's insane to think about. We get upset. I had a podcast that goes, I've been doing this a year and I've only got 200 downloads a week. And I went, a 200, think of a pastor that would say that. I only got 200 people in my church and we just planted a year ago. You'd be like, that's amazing. And I'm not comparing pastors and podcasters, but I'm saying you do need to understand that people are listening.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are listening, and stuff that goes on the internet lives forever. So be mindful when you're talking like that. But my point being is, even if you find the niche of, we're not all going to be the next Joe Rogan, right? You're not going to have 8 million downloads every single episode and $100 million contracts with Spotify. And nor are we doing it for that. Most of the guys I talk to go, no, I'm just interested in this. I want to bring glory to God. And if you're doing it for that reason, I want to be your friend and I want to help promote you.
Yeah. No, and you've like I said earlier, you've been such a resource for a lot of us because again, I've kind of kept up with your brackets and in each of them there have been people that I'm like, I've never heard of that one, and I'll go check it out and be like, oh, that's solid, I mean, and again,
Yeah.
like you said, you can't catch all of them, but to support one another. And when you are in content creation, I think one of the greatest ways that we can support each other is doing exactly what we're doing right here, where the exposure of your audience gets exposed to my audience gets exposed to your show, and we get to go, I didn't even know that guy existed, so
Yeah.
I know for me, I am a pastoral intern, assistant to the pastor. I'm in the PCA, so we have really um, very defined things about what roles we can hold before we're fully ordained. And I'm ordained as a ruling elder, but not as a teaching elder. God willing, Lord, please, that'll happen. That'll happen next year. But um, but I'm 46 years old, and I'm finding memorizing the shorter catechism way harder than it would have been 20 years ago.
Sure.
But I digress. So it's one of those things that you kind of go, I started this because I started realizing that at my own church and just in the circles that I was running in, a lot of folks didn't understand how to take the sermons that they were hearing on Sunday or even the Bible that they were reading throughout the week. I mean, even I'm talking faithful Christians who were trying their best to serve the Lord, and they didn't understand how to take that theology and then make it into kind of practical theology.
Yeah.
So my channel is what I call practical theology for everyday life. It's kind of civics and ecclesiology, family, whatever kind of happens to float to the top, whether it's in the cultural milieu or just in my own what I'm seeing at my own church or in my own world or what have you. And so I agree. There's just so many of us out there that are seeing real felt needs of whether it was ourselves or people in our lives, and we went, man, how can I meet that need? How can I scratch that itch? And man, what a blessing it's been to see. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. This really robust and well done um, Christian content creation just kind of exploding onto the scene. And I know a lot of us talk about from time to time, even on X, that God would use a guy like Elon Musk to spend $44 billion, to buy something that quite honestly has had to have been an albatross around his neck, at least thus far. It's probably cost him money every single month. And it's definitely put that lawfare target on his back.
Mhm.
And, but I don't know if any group has gotten the benefit out of X being now truly a platform for free speech as much as we Christians have.
Oh no, I wholeheartedly agree. And like I said, you have the content creation and kind of that sect is so powerful. when you start getting nicknames in the mainstream, Theo Bros and things like
Yep.
that, whether they're derogatory or not, it tells you something about the effectiveness you're having by flooding the marketplace with your Christian content. Also, too, really, just to jump back, just for those listening, if you do want to get your name in the bracket this year, let me know. We're going to expand it. I've already got a guy that does beautiful work on Bible rebinds. That's going to be a prize. There's cash prizes. There's going to be also I don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to vote and say, the person with the least amount of votes in each category, they might get a bump if they have a second vote. So that way, if you're a smaller podcast and you've got 100 followers on Twitter X and you're going up against, I don't know, an Apologia or a Haunted Cosmos or something, and they've got something like 50 or 100,000, it'll level the playing field a little bit. Now listen, don't mistake that. Okay, I'm a limited government guy. I don't believe in redistribution of wealth or anything. All right, but when you start saying level the playing field, it sounds very Democrat, very Kamala Harris. But I'm saying just to keep them in the gates a little longer, in the bracket a little longer. But yeah, so that'll be fun. So reach out to me because we want to get as many. We're probably going to expand it past 64. We'll probably go to 128 and do it for like a 2-week stretch, just like regular like NCAA March Madness. But
Nice.
yeah, the content creation is key. And guys like you that are doing it and being consistent, putting out episodes, whatever their time slot, whether it's once a month or once a week or twice a month or once a quarter. I know a guy that does voiceover stories from the Bible, produces them in his studio, does the sound effects and everything. And he's only releasing once every 3 months. And man, the podcast name escapes me. And I want to really promote it because he does such a good job. And you get a 2 to 3 hour story from the Bible with like audio
Wow.
with professionally produced, but it's enough. You're like, yeah, that's one that I check in on once a quarter and cool. I'm taking a drive up north or doing something. I'm gonna throw it on and I get a 2 to 3 hours. So there's all these niches too. And we're doing it really well. To go back to what I was saying earlier, which is why, yeah, let's promote it. Let's be friends. Let's figure out how we bring glory to God and what we do.
Absolutely. It was, and I love that you've said that now twice. So I want to definitely kind of touch on that. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean it as the best thing. Um, After the Steve Lawson debacle and kind of how many people were hurt by that. And honestly, it shocked me a little bit to see how big a deal that became. I mean, I'm not going to say I never listened to Steve Lawson. I have, but he just wasn't my flavor, so I wasn't super invested into Steve Lawson's personal ministry. I knew he was a big name at Ligonier, especially after the passing of RC. But boy, did I get a ton of views and things when I talked about Steve Lawson. And again, as a content creator, you kind of are always going, what does the algorithm want? I mean, it is a little bit nebulous at times. But what I was most amazed by is people's really stark reactions to it. So I put out something, just kind of 9 steps on how to prevent this from happening. Which if you're an elder, a deacon, certainly a pastor, these were just 9 practical steps that I kind of came up with that I thought were good for don't get yourself in this kind of trouble, disqualifying sin. And one of my final ones, it was number 7, number 8, number 9, somewhere around there, was become friends with other pastors in your locale, in your area. Whether that's in your denomination or other denominations, stop acting like you're competing with one another. We're all in the kingdom, and you've said that about the podcast world too, and I couldn't agree more. When we act like we're somehow this bizarre competition, it only hurts all of us. We are rowing in the same direction. So my goodness, be friends with these men. They understand what you're going through in ways that, like, even your wife may not, or certainly the
Yeah.
other friends that you have outside of whether it's content creation or ministry. If you don't do this, it's a weird world. It's niche is the right word. It's a very weird niche to live in, and you need brothers and friends that can kind of go, man, I've been there. I understand. So, well, I watched a recent episode of yours, and it was actually, again, my wife to the rescue. Didn't think I was going to make it out to the Fight Laugh Feast conference this year because it's all the way out in Fort Worth, and we're in Charlotte. And we've got 3 small kids, and my wife still works full time. And I thought, nah, it's just not going to happen. And then she and I sat and watched your episode that you put out recently about your involvement this year at the Fight Laugh Feast conference. And at the end of that episode, she looked at me and went, all right, I'm going to call the travel agent tomorrow and get this booked. We just, I mean, and God started opening all these weird doors. Like, Gabe kind of made some tickets available for content creators, which was very generous of him. And that would be Gabe Wrench for those of you listening. We're kind of talking a little inside baseball here, but Gabe Wrench, who's one of the men from Fight Laugh Feast and Cross Politic. And then like 2 days after this happened, my wife got an award from her work that was a gift card for travel, like, and she was like, well, apparently that's travel's basically going to be paid for, your tickets taken care of. And I was like, okay, I don't have any good excuses as to why I can't go, so
Right.
it just happened. But just briefly touch
Don't
on.
don't be a Jonah. Don't run from the will of God. He
No,
wants you in Fort Worth,
that's right.
Texas.
That's right. So I'm
His
going
providence
to
is leading you there.
I'm gonna go and try to enjoy myself. It'll be awful, I'm
Oh
sure.
man, it's like pulling. Yeah.
But kind of tell my audience, because I know some of them certainly, weren't privy to that episode, but you've got a pretty large involvement this year, it sounds like, with what's going to be happening there in Fort Worth at the conference. Share with my audience a little bit about kind of how that came about, what you're going to be doing while you're there, and a little bit about what can be expected from this year's conference.
Yeah, so I think we talked about this offline, how your first one was last year, and I almost said I loved it last year at the creation or at the Ark Encounter, excuse me. But it was probably the least Fight Laugh Feasty feel. I've been to 5, right, since 2020. Meaning we've always felt this conference started, it started almost as like an underground, like rebel, like we're gonna do this because it started in COVID in 2020, and everyone's like, we're shutting you down, you can't do anything. Churches are online now, right? And so in like September of 2020, well, before that, the Cross Politic guy said, hey, no, we're still gathering. We're going to do this conference. And it was so well attended because no one could do anything. And they
Yeah.
found an event outside of, I think it was in Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. And it was like everyone showed up. I mean, there was no speaking engagements. So your guys like James White and Jeff Durbin and Greg Bonson and, the Cross Politic guys and Doug Wilson and Cy Birkenkai. Now, all these different guys that were like, yeah, well, I got nothing going on. They just showed up. They weren't even necessarily speakers. Gary DeMar and right. So from the very beginning, it felt very like, yeah, like alternative, like punk rock a little bit, right? And it's always felt that way because every conference, we'll find a gastropub or a bar or a microbrewery, and we'll bring 200 guys there. We'll take it over. We'll smoke cigars, sing psalms, sing hymns, have theology debates right in the bar, and the bartenders and the owners are going, "Who are these guys?" Right? And it's really a visual medium of like what the kingdom should be. How wherever you go, as you go into the world, Christ said. And remember, the as was dropped in the New King James, but he said, as you, he didn't say go into the world, he said, as you
Yeah.
go into the world, right? You're discipling nations, you're making disciples, all these things. This year I'm just kind of helping with Media Row because we really wanted to put a focus on putting all the podcasters in the same area, making sure the speakers know it's Media Row, which goes back to your earlier statement too of, these guys are they're down with the peasants, so to speak. I've been to some G3 conferences. I think I went to the National in 2021, and it was so tough because everyone's behind a velvet rope and there's a green room, and oh, we don't take pictures and we don't write. We can't do a podcast. No, you got to go to the book section. And if you want to buy a book, that's fine. I mean, Gabe and Chocolate Knox and Toby Sumter and Toby in his own right, being a pastor, they're told walk among the people, make sure you're sitting down and interviewing. We're going to have 20, 30 different podcasts and media outlets represented there that reach over probably 3 to 4 million people combined. Like, go do that and answer their questions. So very friendly on the podcast side for this conference. I've never found a conference really like it, which is exciting for podcasters. But then as an attendee, it's so nice to be walking down Media Row and you see Doug sitting down with Corey and they're discussing local government. And you go, what the heck? And you're watching it live. And then you can tell those people, oh, this will be out next week. Or like, it's just a different experience than sitting in a chair, which you do a lot of that. You sit in a chair and you listen to speakers, but a lot of people milling around. There's stuff going on during the speakers. I mean, yeah, they pack it with speakers. So you might not make every speech, but you might be in the Media Row section. You might be in the sponsor section, whatever it is. It's just a very cool feel. And then the after parties are insane. The dinners, the theology dinners. There's a VIP 1689 cigar party on Saturday night. My friend Kyle Hessler, who's hooking me up with some chairs. Shout out to Kyle Hessler. He lives in Texas. He's going to be throwing that. So it's like all these little mini events afterwards too, to where it's really encouraged where you like, hey, there's a singles event. There's a gathering by state one night. So you can just, oh, you're all the guys from Michigan. You're all the guys from Idaho. You're all the guys from Tennessee, right? So very geared towards making sure you make connections. And then if you're on the business side of it, even if you're attending and you're like, I don't do podcasting. I don't want to talk in front of people, but man, whatever. I move a lot of rubber in the import export industry or something. There's going to be someone there that can help you with that or make a connection. I mean, it's insane when you start talking to these reform guys, because we're all kingdom builders. I mean,
Yeah.
that's our theology, right? We're doing things. And we think that work is a blessing from the Lord. So you meet guys that are really titans of industry, and you go, wait a minute, you believe the same way I do, and you're doing this, and you can help with that, and I can help with that. And it's just so nice to be linked up with other believers, even in business, not just in church or in life, but especially being equally yoked in business is awesome. So it's a very well-rounded conference. Like I said, if anyone's out there right now listening, we could still probably squeeze you in if you wanted to come to Media Row. I'm handling that portion of it. Regular tickets are still available, and they're very reasonable by conference standards. But I would say come down, hang out, have a good time. It's one of the best conferences I go to every year.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know last year we came early. We wanted to be there for the beer and psalms, and I'm going to be out there this year for that as well. And I know that event that you were talking about, where they break by state. I think we did that last year right after the beer and psalms event. They just, held up these signs, are you from, again, in your case, Michigan, North Carolina, and mine. And I met my father-in-law, and I met some wonderful brothers and sisters from North Carolina, from the Boone area. And because of that, because we met them there at the conference, I've attended there. My wife and I have a place up kind of that way up in the mountains, and we were vacationing one weekend. And it's rare as a guy on staff at a church that I'm gone on a Sunday, but it does happen occasionally. And so we were gone, and we were like, man, where are we going to go? And we said, well, I met some folks from Boone. So we drove over to their church. We had a wonderful time of worship that morning. They invited us to their home for lunch that day. We stayed until, like 3 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, just the best time of just fellowship with their they have a really large family, which again, you were mentioning earlier is a big reformed thing, and God bless it. So we had just this wonderful time, and a brother named John White and his family. And then when Helene hit, I reached
Mm.
out to John and I said, hey, are you guys okay? And he said, yeah, church kind of got underwater. My business has got some damage and things, but we're managing. I said, well, I'm bringing a team up from our church. Can we come help? And he said, we're probably okay, but let me put you in contact with a guy who definitely I know knows where there's some need. And so he gave me the name of a guy. Again, we're all Presbyterians, but he gave me the name of a guy from a Baptist church there in Boone. We took a team. We were able to help and really do some good. And all of that
Oh, so you
happened.
just showed up in that 4 foot of water. You said, "Give me these babies. Let's get them baptized, huh?" To that Baptist.
If only they would allow me. But yeah, but
Oh,
all
that's
of that
awesome, man.
happened because of that event last year at the Fight Laugh Feast conference. I met a man who now has been a blessing to me and my family, who hooked me up so that our church could bless folks who had been, impacted by Hurricane Helene. I mean, you think only God could do that. I know
100%.
the cross politic guys often say, that God tells the best stories, and they're absolutely right. I mean, that I couldn't have orchestrated that. I'm not smart enough to have done that on my own, and you kind of go, that's amazing.
No, I'm thoroughly convinced that when God moves on the hearts of men and we are responsive and do as the Bible commands, there isn't a more efficient network than God's network through the Holy Spirit. I mean, I've seen it time and time again in my life, to where it's kind of been what I kind of repeat to myself too, is like God will move on any man's heart. And when I say man, I'm talking about any person, male or female, any man's heart at any time, for any reason, for anything that he wants to accomplish. And that is, as Charles Spurgeon said, the sovereignty of God is the soft pillow on which I lay my head in hard times. So the fact that you met a random guy who then hooked you up with it, right? It's like, that's how it's supposed to be. And also too, remember, we live in a culture right now where the news and the mainstream media and the majority of the left tell you every single day everyone hates each other. You're all a bunch of racists. You're all a bunch of chauvinists. You're all a bunch of sexists. You all hate trans people. You hate women's rights. You hate women. And it's hate, 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 right? And then you have this network going on, even from a conference and in the greater kingdom of God, to where I'm sorry, but that's hate proof. Like, no, I'm going to go help a brother that's hundreds of miles away from me on the word of another brother that I met hundreds of miles away. And the only thing we share is the blood of Christ.
That's right.
And that's enough. That's all we have to share. I don't need to know what color you are, your background. Honestly, and most of the time, I don't need to know your denomination. Now, look, I'm not going up there if you're in a cult or something like. Heck, I dug wells. It was four Reformed guys and 4 Mormons, and we dug a well together for a nonprofit, and it was a theology off, and it was awesome. And I think I got 2 of them. I'm still talking to 2. The other 2 not so receptive. But it was funny to where it's like some things you can partner. And look, I'm not putting Mormons in with Orthodox Christianity. They're out there. They're more towards the cult for me. But my point being is you can preach the gospel anywhere you go. And then when you have brothers that believe in Orthodox Christianity, I mean, that bond is so tight, right? It's so culture proof. And it's something that really the left, and more greatly, Satan himself, does not understand. That's how we win down here.
Yep.
We don't lose down here. We win down here by carrying out the gospel every single day in our thoughts and actions.
Well, because and again, just to kind of touch on something that I think your channel touches on it a lot, and I know that my channel does too. There is a hope of glory, most assuredly. I mean, we all as Christians agree that there's a hope of glory. And I think the big difference between a more lose down here theology and a win down here theology is, where do we find the glory? And whose promises are we relying on? I was watching just before we went online. I was catching a little bit of news because that's a lot of what I do. So I ingest a lot of news. So pray for me on that. But this was actually a great story. Donald Trump has come to North Carolina. He's in Western North Carolina today, right now, and he was meeting with some folks, and I mean, it was just palpable to see how him being there in person, not doing a flyover, not saying, hey, I can see the damage from up here. No, getting his shoes dirty and probably still wet, because I mean, we're still pumping water out of places up here. So him being on the ground and seeing the just the visual impact that he was making just in his presence was such a reminder to me. And I'm not linking Trump to God. I'm not doing that weird thing that too many Christians are doing right now with pictures of Jesus like holding him, and that can get creepy. I'm not saying that, but there is something to the fact that a man, he brought a guy up to speak. This guy was telling about stuff there on the ground, and then on national TV, he said, "Mr. President, can I pray for you?" while I'm still standing here at the mic. And former President Trump said, "Sure." And this guy prayed, and I mean, it was a real prayer. And
I didn't see it.
And he prayed for Donald Trump and for God to use him, and I was like, man, that was fantastic. I mean, so there is these really helpful good news stories, but we miss them. They're not public, published out there. They're certainly not given a lot of exposure, but I just happened to be watching in real time, and I was like, man, that was fantastic. But what I say to our people, both at my church and here on my channel, and I know we need to wrap up, you've got other things to do, and I want to give you the last word, but one of the things that I try to tell our people all the time is, if the gospel of Jesus Christ changes human hearts, and we know that it does, we all, of every stripe of Christian, confesses that that's true. That Christ takes sinners and cleans them up, certainly justifies and adopts us. And that Westminster Confession would say that that is a act of God. That's a one-time event. But then it says that sanctification, in the Westminster Standards, it says sanctification is a work of God's free grace. That's a progressive, not punctiliar thing. And if we know that that's the case in the individual human heart, I don't understand how we've missed the fact that when you get a lot of human hearts and human beings together, that's just called culture. That's called, the world. So if you've got millions of Christians who are progressively becoming more like Christ, doesn't it stand to reason that culture slowly will follow as we continuously are reformed to be more like the image of Jesus Christ? So that's one of the things that I say. I just think they've misunderstood the big picture of progressive sanctification takes a while, so,
Sure.
Yeah, and again, kind of final thoughts, whether it's on that or kind of anything else. But
Well, I would no, thank you. I would say also too, you have to remember sanctification is an active work, and you do have some responsibility in it. Now,
that's
how
right.
that mystery works of God's sovereign decree and our responsibility, it's clearly in the Bible. But what we did as a culture is I really look back, and the older you get too, especially when you hit your 40s, you either got to get into like history or like smoking like meats. And right now I have right about 200 feet away from me, I have a brisket going, and I Googled something about the Revolutionary War yesterday. So I'm doing well. So when you look back in history, you see we just kind of coasted on Christendom. And we
Yeah.
realized, oh, maybe we can just have it all. Maybe we can like do a little sinning and have the American dream and, apple pie and baseball and everything's good. And it's like, oh no, uh, sanctification is a progress, but it also has to, there's also responsibility on the person being sanctified as well on how we live and how we act and how we talk and how we allow in our societies and how we want them structured. And we created a vacuum in the last 30 to 40 years. And now I think the pendulum is starting to swing back. You're already starting it to see in secular culture, woke ideology is getting ridiculed by some on the left, or even those that used to be kind of democratically left leaning.
Mhm.
And then you're seeing this surge of kind of the argument on Christian nationalism and what that means. The reformed surge as well, way different than what happened in the Young, Restless, and Reformed in like the '04 kind of era. It's much more focused on, okay, we can say we know these things about God, but how do we practically live them out? Kind of what your podcast is doing, right?
Yeah.
Like you probably get a lot of listeners, or you're going to get a lot of listeners throughout your time, and they're going to go, yeah, I saw this word and you can define this word, but how does that practically apply to me and the culture and what I'm doing at work and how I'm raising my kids and how I should vote and how I should look at politics? And that's really where the divide was, because we went into this area where it was like coasting on Christendom, created a vacuum. And then in that vacuum, we thought, well, if we just keep defining theological words and we have our scholars in the ivory towers and they come down every once in a while and tell us, well, yeah, this is what this word now means. And now we have a consensus on this. No, you have to do both, which is what's very interesting to me. I love defining words. I love etymology. I love, definitions. But I also love when someone can take a big, heavy, weighty thing and go, this is how you practically apply it. Or here's an example of this in real life and how it applies. And we're getting a lot more of that in the last 5 to 10 years, which is really starting to turn the tide on the culture, especially the secular culture, also the Christian culture. You've seen a lot of the larger evangelical culture as well kind of turn their head and go, wait, what are these reform bros doing over here?
Yeah.
Or wait, what are these guys doing over here that don't necessarily subscribe to seeker friendly smoke fog machines, Jesus is my boyfriend songs, Batman on Easter? Like, wait, I thought that was a thing. And even those kind of moderate evangelicals are like, no, this just doesn't feel like church. I'm not, nothing is getting done. Nothing is getting done for God in my life. Week to week when I'm sitting in this church that, glorifies production and entertainment over actual worship of the living creator. So we're seeing that tide shift. I think it's a pendulum swing back. I hope we don't overcorrect, because even in the church, we sometimes have that, tendency to overcorrect when we see something going wacky. But God is sovereign overall, and he uses every single thing. He will use any president that's elected exactly how he wills. Proverbs says the hearts, with the king's heart's in his hand, he moves it to and fro like a stream. Like that's where I rest easy, because, and really quickly, I'll just say as a short testimony, for years, because I've been involved in local politics, state, and a couple national campaigns since like 2008. And I was just consuming so much news. And I kept saying to myself, but if I consume the news, but then like preach against it and post about it, right? But I was consuming it so much that I would run to my news feed. This was probably 7 years ago. I'd run to my news feed before I'd run to my family, before I'd run to the Bible, before I'd meditate and pray. And the Lord just through an event basically jarred me and went, well, you now have an idol in your life, and that
Mm.
idol is your news feed. And you can
Mhm.
rationalize it all you want. And I'm not saying it because you said you consume a lot of news. I'm saying in general, this is what happened to me. You can consume it all you want, and you can say, oh, this is bad, and point to the truth, but you take comfort in that news feed, instead of me and in my word. And I went, whoa. So I had to really step back to the point to where some of my friends and colleagues, they would still come up to me a year and a half, 2 years later and go, oh, did you see this or that? And I go, no. And they're like, what? You were the guy that like knew about it before anyone else. And right.
Yeah.
And I just went, no, it was an idol in my life. Martin Luther says, in times of trouble, the thing you run to and cling to, that is your God.
Mm.
So it had become an idol for me. But yeah, but keeping up on that, you have to as well, right? You can't just stick your head in the sand. I hate that theology, and I'm an '80s and '90s kid, and it was very prevalent. You touched on it earlier, where it's just like kind of stick your head in the sand, wait for Jesus to return, and don't do anything. I would say, and I don't know if you agree with this, you can answer. I think that kind of thinking got the church in the position it did in the late '90s, early 2000s, and where we are today, from all that '70s and '80s and early '90s. Like, hey man, just don't be part of the culture and just wait for Jesus to come back. He's coming back any day, and it's like, well, he didn't, and you seceded a whole lot of ground.
That's right.
In politics, in the church, in your elected officials. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Well, you're, and I'm sure you knew that you did it because I think you wrote a review for his book, but you were somewhat talking about some of the stuff that Matthew Everhard talks about in his new book, Worshiptainment. And I was reading some of it to my wife the other night, and she was like, "Where did he come up with these ideas? Did he just are these?" And I said, "No, these are real things that have happened." And
Crazy.
he's actually exposing things that have actually happened at actual churches, and so no, you're absolutely right. We kind of abandoned that sinking ship mentality. I'm teaching an overview of eschatology right now in my adult Sunday school class at church, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to start revealing to them is, here you are, members of a PCA Presbyterian covenantal church, and 99% of you are dispensational eschatology. There is a cognitive dissonance that is happening there. And I'm not angry about it. That's not my point. And if at the end of us looking at the four major positions of eschatology, you still say, nope, this is the one that I think is the most accurate to the Bible, again, fine. I can be a brother in Christ to you. That's not a big deal. But if you only believe that because it's the only position you even knew existed, well, then let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So
Very, very quickly too, I would say, and you'd probably agree with this, is classical dispensationalists, or even classical premill, I should say. Classical premill did not have that attitude of like, stick your head in the ground and
that's
just
right.
wait it out. It's really the dispensationalists that kind of messed with that and made it its own little theology inside of a larger theology. You take like a MacArthur, for instance, a classical premillennialist, and he would never say just sit around and do nothing. I mean, the guy's been churning out works and pastoring a church and all these things for decades. So it's pretty crazy too, because you just step back. We always think we're like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're in this day of this month of this year. Let's step back and look at global history, global church history. We're just in a 100-year period where we've had some really wacky theology where it's gotten very popular. If we're still here in 300 years, we'll look back and we'll laugh at that. And we'll remember, and we'll go, remember for like 100 years, like maybe 1850s, like the 1950s, it was really prevalent to think that, whatever, that Jesus got 4 different raptures and this and that, right? And you just go, well, hold on. Let's look at classically, historically, what the church has believed for thousands of years. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. We've built societies and foundations off of them. And you get this kind of sense of relief of like, okay, yeah, then I just put my head down, keep preaching the truth. And like I said, the Lord allows everything to happen for a reason, ultimately for his glory. And that's what I take comfort in.
Yeah. Amen, brother. And I know you've got a 2:00 another appointment, so I want to be respectful of that.
I wish I didn't.
I,
I'd sit here
I
and talk to you for another hour.
well, I think I'm going to be in Fort Worth in about a week and a half, and we'll have to make good on that. So
yeah, for sure.
And I would seriously, let's have another conversation sometime and talk about real estate, and maybe we can rope in the Story Real Estate people that I know are part of the team out there in Moscow. They I think they have some. One of their sponsors is a big real estate company that's Reformed guys, and I'd love to get the three of us on a conference call of some kind and talk about kingdom building through actual ownership of real estate. I think that's
well, heck, let's make an episode out of it.
Let's do it
offline. We'll figure it out, and you guys come on Dead Men Walking. I did a whole real estate episode right after the changes, because I just had so many people asking me questions that weren't even looking to buy or sell. It was just a big change.
Yeah.
And it was a really good episode. But yeah, we should definitely do that because it is part of kingdom building. But yeah, thanks so much
Absolutely.
for having me on, man. Love what you're doing.
Thanks for coming. We'll talk soon.
All right, Corey.
All right.
God bless.
Bye.